I only meant to drop something off. But when my friend's mom opened the door, smiled and said, "You knocked late. That makes it more fun." I realized this night would stay with me far longer than I planned. It was close to 9:30 when I finally pulled up outside Liam's house. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that feels heavier at night, when porch lights glow like small beacons in the dark. I hadn't planned to come this late, but a delay at work and a missed message had turned a simple drop-off into something that felt oddly like a secret errand. The porch creaked under my shoes as I climbed the steps, a drizzle still whispering across the pavement behind me. The soft hum of crickets filled the space between breaths. I knocked twice, quick and polite. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the sound of footsteps, slow, unhurried, approached from inside. When the door opened, it wasn't Liam. It was his mother, Clara. She stood in the doorway wearing a loose cream cardigan that hung open just enough to show a faded blue t-shirt beneath. Her hair, chestnut with soft hints of silver near the temples, was tied back loosely, a few strands falling over her cheek. The warm light behind her framed her in gold, making the cool night air between us feel strangely intimate. Her brows lifted slightly when she recognized me. "Oh," she said with a faint smile. "You knocked late." She paused, her eyes glinting with something playful before adding, "That makes it more fun." I laughed softly, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the surprise. Maybe the way her tone wrapped the words in amusement and warmth at once. She tilted her head, as if studying the expression on my face, and for a second I caught the gentle curve of her smile deepening. "I didn't mean to bother you," I said quickly. "I just wanted to drop off Liam's hard drive. He said he needed it for tomorrow." Clara waved a dismissive hand. "You're not bothering me. He's not home yet, but you can leave it with me if you'd like." She stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated for a moment. The drizzle, the glow of her living room, her steady eyes, then crossed the threshold. The scent of chamomile and something faintly floral lingered in the air. A small lamp illuminated the hallway, its light soft and golden. "Busy night?" she asked as she closed the door gently behind me. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Work ran late." "Well," she said with a small shrug, "you made it here in one piece. That's what counts." There was something about the way she spoke, deliberate, calm, yet tinged with warmth, that pulled the tension from my shoulders. Her gaze lingered for a fraction longer than it needed to. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper, but inside everything felt amplified. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a wall clock, and the steady rhythm of her breathing nearby. As she reached out to take the hard drive from my hand, her fingers brushed against mine. Light, brief, but enough to leave a quiet spark in its wake. She smiled again, not teasing this time, just gentle. "Thanks for bringing it by," she said. "Next time, don't wait so long to knock." Her tone was playful, but her eyes said something else, something I didn't quite understand yet. I stepped back into the cool night air, realizing that the warmth from her touch hadn't faded. And that's when I knew I'd be thinking about that late knock for a while. A few evenings later, I found myself driving down the same quiet street again. I told myself it was just to return a screwdriver Liam had left in my car, but even as I rehearsed the excuse, I knew it wasn't really about the screwdriver. Something about that late-night conversation with his mom lingered in my thoughts. Her warmth, her voice, the way she had said my name like she was trying to remember how it felt on her tongue. When Clara opened the door this time, the house behind her glowed softly with amber light. She wore a simple dark green blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hair fell freely around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw me, that same knowing, slightly amused expression. "You again," she teased lightly. "You really do have bad timing." I grinned. "Seems to be a pattern." "Come in then," she said, stepping aside. "I was just making tea. Unless you're in a hurry." I wasn't. Not even close. The kitchen was softly lit, the overhead light off, only a small candle flickering on the counter beside a teapot. The faint scent of chamomile drifted through the air. Clara moved with an easy grace, not rushed, not deliberate, just comfortable in her space. She poured the tea into 2 ceramic cups and handed one to me, her fingers brushing mine. The warmth of the cup seeped into my palms as I sat opposite her at the small wooden table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence didn't feel awkward, more like a pause the world had made for just the 2 of us. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, soft and rhythmic. "So," she began, her eyes catching the candlelight. "How have you been, really?" The question caught me off guard. Not because of the words, but the sincerity behind them. It wasn't polite conversation. It was genuine curiosity. I found myself answering honestly, talking about how strange it felt after graduation, how the days seemed to blur together, work, sleep, repeat. She listened without interrupting, hands wrapped loosely around her cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. "I know what that feels like," she said. "You think once you hit a certain age, life should start making sense. But some days," she smiled faintly, "some days it's just tea and candlelight, and trying again tomorrow." Her words landed quietly but deeply. I nodded, unsure what to say. The candle flame flickered as a small draft passed through the room. Its light shimmered across her face, softening her expression, catching in her eyes. There was something magnetic about the stillness. 2 people sitting in a kitchen late at night, talking about the parts of life no one usually admits out loud. When I finally looked up again, I found her watching me. Not staring, just observing, as if reading something unspoken. The space between us felt warm, stretched thin by a silence neither of us wanted to break. Then she smiled, and it was enough to let the air move again. "Tea's better when shared," she said quietly. "Don't wait for an excuse next time." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes lingered a heartbeat longer than they should have. As I left, I caught my reflection in the window, and behind me, the soft glow of candlelight still flickered in her kitchen, like something that wasn't quite ready to fade. It had only been a few days since that evening with the tea and candlelight, but something had shifted between us. I could feel it the moment I stepped onto her porch again, that quiet hum beneath ordinary gestures. I wasn't sure what I was doing there this time, except that part of me wanted to see if that warmth in her eyes had been real, or just a trick of candlelight. When Clara opened the door, she looked pleasantly surprised. Her hair was pulled back this time, a few strands escaping near her neck, and she wore a soft gray sweater that fell loosely over her shoulders. "You again," she said with a half-smile, leaning against the doorframe. "You're making a habit of this." "Maybe I am," I replied, holding up the small box of tools I'd promised to return. She laughed quietly. "Come in, then. You know the way." The house smelled faintly of citrus and rain, fresh, alive. There was music playing softly from a speaker in the living room, something old and slow, a woman's voice that seemed to drift in and out of memory. I set the box on the counter while she walked ahead to switch off the kettle. Her movements were unhurried, familiar. When she turned back toward me, our eyes met. It wasn't the first time, but something about it felt different. Like both of us realized at the same moment that the line we'd been pretending not to see was suddenly right there, sharp and glowing between us. She looked away first, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You're always so quiet," she said softly. "I don't want to say the wrong thing," I admitted. She smiled, that same knowing look again. "Maybe there's no wrong thing. Maybe silence says enough." The air between us thickened, not uncomfortable, but charged. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the whisper of her breath. When she stepped closer to take the box from me, our shoulders nearly touched. The space between our hands was no more than an inch. She reached out, and for a moment, her fingers grazed mine. Just a passing touch, maybe accidental, but it didn't feel that way. Her skin was warm, her touch feather-light, and still, it sent a pulse through me I didn't expect. She froze slightly, eyes flicking up to mine. Neither of us spoke. I wanted to step back or maybe forward, but I did neither. I just stood there, caught in the small, electric silence that felt louder than words. Finally, she drew a quiet breath and smiled. that gentle, graceful way she had of ending moments before they went too far. "Thanks for bringing these," she said, her voice steady again. "You're too kind." I nodded, but my mind wasn't on the tools anymore. It was on the warmth that still lingered where our hands had touched. As I turned to leave, she walked me to the door. The same soft music played behind us, the evening light fading through the curtains. When I stepped out, I looked back just once. And she was still there, hand resting lightly against the edge of the doorframe, watching me go. Our eyes met for a final second, and in that glance, I could feel everything we hadn't dared to say. Saturday morning came dressed in sunlight, the kind that makes everything look softer, warmer, easier to breathe in. I told myself I was only stopping by to return something Liam had left in my car again, but I knew that wasn't the real reason. It wasn't even about him anymore. There was a pull, gentle, steady, that kept drawing me back to that quiet house and to her. Clara's house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, its front garden bursting with color. Roses, lavender, and jasmine filled the air with a scent that made the morning feel alive. I spotted her outside before she saw me. Kneeling beside a flower bed, her hair tied up in a loose knot, sleeves rolled to her elbows. There was a smear of soil on her forearm, and she hummed softly as she worked. I hesitated at the gate, watching for a moment. There was something peaceful about her. The way she moved, the way the sun caught in her hair. When she finally looked up, a small smile curved across her face. "Well," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "You're becoming a regular visitor." I grinned. "You make it hard to stay away." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, a flicker of surprise, then something softer. "Careful," she said with a quiet laugh. "Flattery before noon is dangerous." She waved me toward the porch. "Come on." I was about to take a break anyway. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and fresh herbs. She poured 2 glasses of cold water, sliding one toward me. Her fingers brushed mine again, a touch so natural it didn't feel like an accident anymore. We sat at the small breakfast table by the window, sunlight pooling between us. Outside, the wind stirred the garden. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, work, weather, the price of gas. But then, almost imperceptibly, the tone shifted. She sighed softly, tracing the rim of her glass. "Some days I miss the noise," she said. "The house used to feel so full. Liam and his friends, music, chaos. Now it's just quiet." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. I watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders rose and fell, the way her eyes softened when she talked about him. "I get that," I said quietly. "It's strange when everything slows down, and you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly." Her eyes met mine. "You sound older than you are." "Maybe I just feel older lately," I said with a small smile. "Like I'm trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be and not getting any closer." Clara leaned back, studying me for a moment. Then she said something simple, but it landed deeper than I expected. "You're doing better than you think." The silence that followed was gentle, filled with sunlight, the sound of leaves rustling outside, the pulse of quiet understanding. When she smiled again, it wasn't the playful, teasing one she usually wore. It was softer, the kind of smile that says, "I see you and I understand." For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter, seen. And as I left that day, the scent of jasmine clinging to the air, I realized that her voice had found a place in my mind that wouldn't easily let go. The sky was already a restless gray when I left my apartment that evening. I hadn't planned on visiting Clara again. At least, that's what I told myself. But the storm clouds above seemed to echo the mood I'd been carrying all day. Maybe that's why I found myself turning down her street, headlights cutting through the mist as the first drops began to fall. By the time I parked, the rain had turned steady, tapping against the windshield in rhythmic sheets. I jogged to the porch, half-drenched, and knocked. The sound of rain muffled everything around me, wrapping the moment in a soft kind of isolation. When the door opened, Clara stood there, surprise flickering across her face before melting into warmth. "You're soaked," she said, stepping aside quickly. Come in before you catch something. Her tone carried that familiar blend of concern and teasing that always disarmed me. I stepped inside, dripping onto the mat. The scent of cinnamon and rain filled the air. She must have been baking before the storm started. The living room glowed with lamplight, soft and golden, making the outside world look even darker through the rain-streaked windows. She handed me a towel. "Honestly, you have the worst timing," she said, smiling. "Or the best," I replied. Her laugh, quiet, genuine, filled the space between thunderclaps. "You might have a point." When lightning flashed outside, the power flickered, dimmed, and then steadied again. She gave a small sigh. "If it goes out, I've got candles. You'll have to help me find them." A few minutes later, the lights did go out. The house fell into near darkness, lit only by the faint gray glow from the windows. "See?" she said, voice soft in the dark. "You brought the drama with you." I followed her to the kitchen, helping her find the candles and matches. As I struck the first match, its brief light illuminated her face. Soft features, calm eyes, a hint of amusement playing at her lips. When the wick caught flame, the candlelight danced over her skin, tracing warmth across the space between us. We placed a few candles around the room. The flickering light made everything feel closer, more personal. She sat down on the couch and patted the space beside her. "Might as well wait it out," she said. I joined her. The rain beat harder against the windows now, but inside it was warm, the kind of warmth that felt like safety, like something you could fall into if you weren't careful. She tucked her legs beneath her, the blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. When another flash lit the sky, she jumped slightly, laughing under her breath. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed her arm. A simple, steadying touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at me, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There was only the rain, the low rumble of thunder, and the quiet understanding that something had deepened, wordlessly, inevitably. Then she smiled. A small, genuine thing that carried more warmth than the room itself, and whispered, "Maybe bad timing isn't so bad after all." Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, everything had gone perfectly still. The storm had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time we stopped talking about it. The candles still burned low, small islands of amber light scattered across the room. Power hadn't returned, but neither of us seemed to mind. The quiet between us felt different now, full, like the room itself was breathing softly. Clara sat beside me on the couch, a thin blanket draped over both of us. I could hear the faint tick of the rain against the window, the kind of rhythm that makes you forget what time it is. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing mine as she adjusted the blanket. It was a simple, natural gesture, yet it sent a pulse of warmth through me that lingered long after. For a while, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, listening to the rain. I could smell her perfume, soft, floral, familiar, and feel the calm steadiness in her breathing. There was no rush, no performance, just the gentle truth of two people sharing space they hadn't planned to share. "I can't remember the last time I felt this peaceful," she said quietly. I turned to look at her. "You mean because of the storm?" Her lips curved faintly, eyes still on the flickering candle. "No," she said, "because of the company." Something in my chest shifted, slow, deliberate, unsteady. I wasn't sure what to say, so I didn't. She turned toward me, her expression open but unsure, as if deciding whether to step across a line she'd drawn for herself long ago. "You remind me," she said softly, "what it feels like to be seen, not as someone's mom, not as the person who keeps everything together, just seen." Her voice trembled just slightly, like she wasn't used to saying things that vulnerable aloud. I wanted to respond, to tell her she wasn't the only one who felt that way, but the words caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. So I did the only thing that felt right. I reached for her hand. Our fingers met halfway, hesitant at first, then slowly interlacing. Her hand was warm, soft, alive in a way that made the rest of the world fade. She didn't pull away. Instead, She let out a quiet breath, one that felt almost like release. I think about that night sometimes, I admitted finally. When I knocked late, the way you looked at me, the way I couldn't stop looking back. Her gaze lifted to mine, steady, unguarded. The space between us was only inches now. The candlelight shimmered against the curve of her cheek, the outline of her lips, the softness in her eyes. For a moment we just sat there, caught between want and reason, between what could be and what shouldn't be. Then she leaned in, not to kiss me, but to rest her forehead lightly against mine. The world went quiet. I could feel her breath, the warmth of it mingling with mine, the thrum of her pulse near her wrist where our hands were joined. Maybe, she whispered, some things are meant to stay right here, in the quiet. I nodded, eyes closed. There was nothing to add. No promise, no regret. Just the deep, wordless truth of a connection neither of us had expected but both had needed. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, neither of us moved. When I woke, the house was quiet. The rain had finally stopped sometime during the night, leaving behind that clean, sweet scent that only follows a long storm. Pale morning light slipped through the half-open curtains, stretching gently across the living room floor. For a moment, I just sat there, still wrapped in the thin blanket we'd shared, and listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator kicking back to life. The power had returned, but the world still felt hushed, as if it hadn't quite woken yet. Clara was already in the kitchen. I could hear the soft clatter of plates, the low hiss of something cooking on the stove. When I walked in, she turned, her hair loosely pinned up, a few damp strands framing her face. She looked rested, calm, though there was something different in her eyes. Not nervousness exactly, something gentler. "Morning," she said, smiling faintly. "You survived the night." I smiled back. "Barely. Your couch almost swallowed me." She laughed, that quiet, musical sound that always seemed to fill a room without trying. "Then I'll take that as a compliment." "Coffee?" She poured 2 cups, sliding one across the counter toward me. The steam curled between us, carrying the comforting scent of roast and something faintly sweet, cinnamon, maybe. We stood there for a moment, both holding our cups, both pretending we weren't thinking about the same thing. The closeness of last night, the hand-holding, the silence that had said everything words couldn't. "Did you sleep?" I asked finally. "A little," she said. "Mostly I just listened to the rain. It's easier to think when the world is quiet." She paused, eyes lifting to meet mine. "I hope last night didn't confuse things for you." I shook my head. "No. If anything, it made things clearer." She tilted her head slightly, curious. "Clearer how?" "That what we have, whatever it is, doesn't need a name to mean something." Her expression softened, and for a long heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she set her cup down and walked around the counter, standing close enough that I could see the faint specks of flour on her sleeve. "You're a good man," she said quietly, "and you've brought more light into this house than you probably realize." I wanted to say something, to tell her she'd done the same for me, but before I could, she reached out and rested her hand on my forearm. Just that touch, warm and grounding. "Next time," she said, voice calm but threaded with affection, "don't wait for the rain." I smiled. "Only if you promise to answer the door." Her laugh was soft, almost shy. For a moment, the air felt still again, like that first night at the door when everything had started. Then she turned back to the stove, and I stood there watching her, memorizing the quiet grace in her movements, the way the morning light brushed her shoulders. When I finally left, the sky was bright and clear. Drops of water still clung to the leaves, glinting like tiny stars. As I walked to my car, I looked back once. Through the kitchen window, I saw her, standing by the counter, coffee cup in hand, a small, content smile on her face. And I knew then that some connections don't fade. They simply settle into the heart, gentle and steady, like the calm that follows a storm. Speech balloon if the story touched something in you. That quiet longing, that warmth that lingers after the rain. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps these slow burn stories keep finding the people who need them most. Red Heart, stay tuned for more age gap love stories that remind us how connection can arrive when we least expect it.